Hello, my name is Jacob Hunter, and I'll be doing a presentation on the effects of chemical warfare. An introduction to chemical warfare. Chemical warfare is the use of deadly chemicals as weapons. In the earlier world wars, countries would use dangerous chemicals to harm people. Like the picture on the right, you can see soldiers with coverings over their eyes to shield them from dangerous chemicals. The use of chemicals as weapons isn't something new in the world, or even for the World War time, it wasn't something new. Chemical warfare usages date all the way back to the 12th century, and history has shown that many types of chemicals can be used to harm humans and even the environment. A deeper history of chemical warfare. The use of chemicals in a harmful way against other people has been around in history for a while. If you look to the image to the right from ScienceNews.com, you can see images of poison-tipped arrows from 60,000 years ago. Some of the earliest forms of toxic chemicals used were straight from plants or animals. So obviously 60,000 years ago, they didn't have chemists making these dangerous chemicals and toxins for them. They would actually take them straight from animals or plants and use it that way. So they had to be creative, which I find interesting. And the first major use of chemical warfare was in 1915 when Germany released chlorine gas across a 6-kilometer area in Belgium. So now we'll look at Germany's relationship with chemical warfare, since they are one of the first countries to really evolve this topic of chemical warfare. There was a man named Fritz Haber, and he was the head of German gas warfare program during the time of World War I, and he wanted to target chlorine gas and figure out a way to capture that and use it to hurt other people. So here are some facts about chlorine gas from the Kansas University Medical Center website. It is about 2.5 times denser than air. It is pale green in color. It also has an odor, which is described as a mix of pineapple and pepper. It can react with water in the lungs to form hydrochloric acid, which is destructive of tissue and can quickly lead to death, or at least permanent lung tissue damage. Even though chemical warfare is banned, Germany was caught using mustard gas once again in World War II in concentration camps to kill people. So the effects on people specifically, physically, a large myth, I would say. People think that in World War One, chemicals were a major factor and a big responsibility of the death count in that war, but actually less than 1% of the fatalities were from chemical warfare. But that doesn't mean that chemical warfare was not harmful to people. It just wasn't as deadly as others think. So physically, if you look to the right, you can see the man with blisters all over his body and these scratches and burns from the chemicals. It also played a big role mentally. So mentally, soldiers were scarred from seeing their friends and fellow soldiers affected by the gases. One of the gases used specifically was mustard gas. It was not only harmful to inhale, but it would stick to soldiers' clothes and cause severe burns and damage to the skin, like the picture from the right shows. That picture is from militaryhistorynow.com. You can see the burns and the blisters all over his body, and that obviously didn't come from just inhaling the gas. It was stuck to his clothes, and that caused all those severe damages. So some symptoms of inhaling or just physically being in chemicals is nose bleeding, respiratory issues, fever, swelling of the body, or even death. These all depend on the amount of time exposed to the gas. So obviously, the more time you're exposed to dangerous chemicals, the more severe the symptoms would be. So let's take a look at modern chemical warfare. So ever since World War I, chemical warfare is banned, but that ban was reinforced in 1972 since some countries were not listening to the worldwide ban earlier. So the reason why it was banned is because the use of chemicals in war ruled as being terrifying and not very efficient in war. So the chemicals were kind of hard to target specific people with them. If you throw dangerous chemicals in an area, it would obviously, you can't like see the radius of how many people it affects with just your eye. So it would oftentimes affect many of the it would do damage to enemies, but it would also damage their own soldiers. Germany learned that. So if I had to pull a positive about chemical warfare, is the fact that it's banned today, but it's not really banned, if that makes sense. There have been countries caught producing and using chemical weapons. For instance, in 2018, Syria used chemical warfare in their civil war. So let's look at the environmental effects of chemical warfare. Not only is chemical warfare dangerous to humans, but it is also not very good for the environment. Nerve gases have the ability to contaminate drinking water. Mustard gas can stick in the soil and remain highly toxic for years. Like the image to the right, that is the battleground of World War One. You can see it. Obviously, it looks like a war ground, that's not. Or poisonous gases aren't exactly responsible for like the way it looks. Like it obviously didn't dig the trenches. But if you look at the soil, there's no grass or anything there. That could be an effect of chemical warfare. And mustard gas can stick in that soil and not be able to grow anything for years. So because of the dangers that chemical warfare was causing the environment, there was a protocol signed called the Geneva Protocol, and it prohibited the use of asphyxiating, poisonous, or other gases, as well as bacteriological weapons in international conflict. That was signed by 38 nations. To wrap things up, chemical warfare has been used for a very long time in the world, from ancient times to World War One. So we talked about that. There are usages all the way back from the 12th century, but the first major use was World War One, obviously, when they used it in a world war. There are different types of compounds that can be created that can cause harm to people. We talked about chlorine gas and mustard gas. Chemical warfare is banned today through the Chemical Weapons Convention, and that bans all development and production of chemicals. And it was mandatory at that time, whenever it was banned, that all chemicals must be destroyed. So the use of chemicals in war is considered foul play, and the environment can't handle the effects of chemical warfare, and neither can people. We saw images of people protecting themselves with the eye coverings, and we also saw a man that was affected directly by chemical warfare. That is all I have for this presentation, but if you're interested about learning more of the effects of chemical warfare and what it can do to the environment or people or even the history of it, here's some of the references I used, or here are all the references I used.